Well, first of all, this is a little awkward because this is a mic for the web broadcast. So if it sounds like I'm not talking into it, I don't understand the technology. I'm older. Before Ryan's going to sort of introduce a group, but I need to give you a little background information so that you'll have your expectations lowered a little bit. At the beginning of the symphony season, I had some medical stuff go on that had me out for a little while. And then a couple weeks ago, my wife was on the NTC website, and she said, "Hey, you guys are doing a presentation." And I said, "No, I don't think so." And she said, "No, your picture's here." So when I got to work, I asked Ryan, and he said, "Oh, yeah, we determined that when you were sick." So in retaliation for that, I'm going to do most of the talking, and they're going to do most of the playing. And then we're very lucky to have Russ here at the downbeat because nobody seemed to do anything about getting ready for this. And then I made up all these books of the music that we were going to play, and I gave Russ his on Tuesday, this past Tuesday, and he said, "What's that for?" And I said, "It's for the NTC presentation." And he said, "When is that?" And I said, "It's on Friday." And he said, "Well, what time?" And I said, "I don't know." So when we figured out it was 1 o'clock, Russ said, "Well, I have to teach a class in Dallas from 11:15 to 12:15. So we're lucky he made it on time.
Shaved a few minutes off.
So anyway, I hope that lowers your expectations enough to. So here's Ryan.
No, give me this microphone. Good grief. All right, well, I can only do that because I trust all of you, and I know that will be fine. Yeah, we agreed to this in the fall and been looking forward to it, even though we weren't quite even sure till recently exactly when it was. But this is when the opportunity came, and they said, "Does the section want to play?" And of course, it was only 3 of us because Tom was busy. We didn't want to bother him. He was going through his medical stuff, and so we just decided for him. We said, "Absolutely, we'd love to do this." And the reason being is I feel incredibly lucky to be able to come to work every day with this particular section. Now, for those of you who are trumpet majors and you're in school and you go to the ensembles and you're thinking about, do you want to do this for a living? And you're making that because you're having so much fun with your friends and your colleagues playing in the section. And then you get in the real world and you don't choose who your colleagues are. You win the job and then you sit down next to them. But I remember in school thinking, man, if I could have it like this, if I could be with the people that I really enjoy and I can handpick, boy, wouldn't that be the greatest life ever? And fortunately, it seems to be that's exactly kind of what happened here. I'm surrounded by incredible, not only players and musicians, but colleagues. And I think it's important that I want to share that with everybody. So we're going to think of this in sort of 2 parts. Tom has put together a really nice, we're going to play sort of a history of the trumpet section and orchestral music that we will play, mostly 3 of us. He put the excerpts together, and it's funny. There's like 3 parts on most of everything. And so we are going to do that, and it's kind of nice. It just sort of shows how it's changed through the years from the beginning and what our roles are and how it's changed. And then afterwards, too, I want to talk about the actual section and how it works. I know in school, everything was first trumpet. You do the first trumpet excerpts, and that's just sort of the main thing. You audition on the first trumpet parts, and you're sort of always kind of, that drives you. And my first job actually was playing second trumpet with the Memphis Symphony. And I got to tell you, it was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. And I actually left after the second year. I mean, I could not do it. And I thought, well, if you can play first, you can play second. That is not the case. And then to be able to find out more about the third associate principal position, each one of these is so unique and so challenging in their own way and vitally important. And I also want to talk about that. And so hopefully we can have some Q&A and everybody here can talk about what they have to do, because I think it's important that you realize that it is truly all 4 parts that are equally difficult, challenging, and they each have special qualities that might be even more of what you're best for. And so you also should be able to be aware of that. So without that, me talking anymore, let's do some playing. And then, but think of questions. We really want this to be very open. We want some dialogue. We want some discussion about either the stuff that's going on now. Most of us, I should introduce the whole group. On second trumpet is Kevin Finnemore. He's our youngest of the section. The thing about Kevin is he won the job straight out of school, straight out of Juilliard. And so, any other Juilliard people here? Any other Juilliard? No? Oh, really? Oh, they're probably streaming. Sorry. Mr. Gould, yes. No, so he was one of those you hear about right out of school, takes a job, wins it. So this is what, your 17th? 18th season now with the symphony. On second trumpet, it's Kevin Finnemore. On third, I say third now, but otherwise you always see him sitting first. He's third associate principal Russell Campbell, also from Juilliard. And this is your 14th? Yes. 14th year. We actually came in somewhat the same time, but I was just extra for 2 years. So technically I only have 12 years under my belt, but 14 years with Russ Campbell. And then the 40th year, 41st, 40th. I just heard wow. Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
It just means you're old.
Yeah. So with 40 years, and so he is sort of what's great is everything that comes up he'll look at it and go, oh man, oh that piece, oh, second trumpet and third page, you better look out for that, or third trumpet on the second page, oh that's really tough. He knows everything. I don't know what we're going to do next year. Tom Booth is retiring. It's going to change the face and laughter and everything within the section, but finishing his 40th season, Tom Booth on fourth, utility assistant, you name it. So if you have questions about obscure pieces, he's played it. If you have questions about your former teacher, he's probably played with them. And so, anyway, yeah, but we only have a few more months. All right, so I'm going to hand the mic over, and you may begin.
Okay, so this is when nobody else could figure out what to do for today. I resurrected a presentation that I did with the Dallas Symphony Trumpet section, but it was a different section because it was about 25 years ago. And we did it at ITG, and I think we did it here. And it's sort of tracing the development of the orchestral trumpet section. And the orchestral trumpet section really started in the Baroque period, and we're talking 1600 to 1750 or so. Now, I've put this together. Hopefully there'll be something for everybody. Some of this information for you grad students, doctoral students, you're going to know a lot of the historical stuff. But this is there's a wide age group here, so hopefully there's something for everybody. In 1619, there was a guy named Michael Praetorius who wrote a thesis called Syntagmum Musicum, and in it he describes the Baroque trumpet section. And he said there was a clarino 1, a clarino 2, and a principal. And they equate to first, second, and third in our modern orchestra. They were playing natural trumpets, usually in the key of C or D, and they were pitched an octave below the instruments that we have today. And so in order to play a melody on those instruments, they had to play very high on the harmonic series where the notes are closer together. And so in playing most Baroque music like this, the upper register is reserved for the clarino 1 and the clarino 2. And then the principal part really resembles the timpani part more than anything else. So we don't do a lot of Baroque music in the orchestra, mostly because an awful lot of Baroque music was written for performances in churches where it's a much smaller venue and a much smaller orchestra. However, in a couple weeks, Ryan will be playing the Brandenburg 2 with the Dallas Symphony. And back in December, we did a whole series of Christmas concerts, and one of the things we played on that concert was Bach's Magnificat, just one movement. So given that we have to play Heldenleben tonight, I've kept most of these demos pretty short. So here's a little snippet of from the Bach Magnificat, and you can see that we use 2 piccolos and either a C or a D on the third part. I told you they were short. Is that all there is? All right. So the next major period in music history after the Baroque period is the classical period, and roughly from 1750 with the death of J.S. Bach through the first decade or so of the 1800s. And all during this time, the woodwind instruments became much more highly developed. And in the classical period, they started to take a lot of those melodies that the trumpets used to have in the Baroque. And plus, there was a stylistic difference. In the Baroque period, it's grander and lots of ornamentation. The classical period is much more elegant and simplistic. And so the trumpets got severely demoted, and they got demoted from 3 down to 2 most of the time, and were mostly relegated to the lowest notes in the harmonic series. So both the first and second parts look a lot like the timpani part. So here's a little snippet of Don Giovanni by Mozart, and you can see how far the trumpet has been demoted. So in 2. Ready? That's about as good as it gets in the classical period. So you notice the guys are using rotary trumpets on this repertoire. And for everything written in the classical period and throughout the Romantic period where composers wrote for the trumpets in a classical way, we use rotary trumpets. The reason is that they have a little darker, a little warmer sound, and it blends better with the orchestra. Plus, even when using rotaries, most of the time when we look up at the beginning of a piece, this is what we see from the conductor, because we're always too loud. Now, Beethoven is a transitional figure between the classical period and the Romantic period. He lived from 1770 to 1827. And if you listen to his symphonies, the first 2 could be right out of the classical period. In the 3rd symphony, he added a 3rd horn. In the 5th symphony, he added trombones. And then by the time he got to the 9th, we have a chorus and soloists and janissary instruments and the percussion. So he really took us from the classical period well into the Romantic. He still used trumpets in pairs on all of his symphonies, and wrote for them classically, except every now and then we get a little bit more prominence in a melodic situation. So this is a little cut from his 5th symphony, right in the 4th movement. So still not a lot of huge, yeah. Still not a lot of melodic material, but a little more prominence anyway. Now the next little section here, I'm going to toggle back and forth between the first half and the second half of the 19th century. In the first half, we have Robert Schumann, who in his 2nd symphony writes a very nice melody at the beginning for the first trumpet. And actually, the second trumpet plays the same melody an octave below, but has to leave some notes out. And there's an awkward leap in the second part because the natural trumpet wasn't capable of playing that whole line. So this is what the part sounds like as it's written on the page. So here you hear that there's a couple notes left out of the second trumpet, and then he had that big leap up to the D natural, which is impossible an octave below. So when we play this repertoire, we automatically will take that melody and play the whole melody in the second trumpet line. So it's a nice, smooth. We're just assuming that Schumann would have done that if he were using the chromatic instrument. So here's what it sounds like with the whole melody. So there are the notes filled in on second. And this is something that we encounter all the way through all of the composers that wrote for natural trumpets, because the second player can't always play the same notes in octaves with the first. So we automatically take those down unless the conductor is some kind of a purist and tells us otherwise. Now, another composer from the first half of the 1800s is Felix Mendelssohn. He also wrote for a pair of natural trumpets in all of his symphonies. There is one piece where he wrote for a third trumpet, still writing for 3 natural trumpets, but this is a little sort of toggled together chunk from his wedding march in Midsummer Night's Dream. 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay, so all of those notes are possible on the natural trumpet. Now, if we move to the second half of the 1800s, we encounter Johannes Brahms. And oddly enough, chromaticism in trumpets was available in the very first decades of the 1800s. And Brahms actually wrote a book of etudes for the chromatic trumpet, but he still never wrote for them in his symphonies. He still wrote for pairs of natural instruments in all 4 of his symphonies. He did make an exception in his academic festival overture, still writing for 3 natural trumpets, but he added a third, which makes the harmony a lot nicer. So here's Academic Festival Overture. All right, now we're going to jump back into the first half of the 1800s because there's a composer there, Hector Berlioz, who was one of the great orchestrators in music history. And Hector Berlioz also wrote for a pair of natural trumpets, but he also paired that with a pair of chromatic cornets. And he did that in his Symphonie Fantastique in 1830, and in Corsair, and this piece, the Roman Carnival Overture. This is the very beginning of that piece, and you can hear that Russ and I are playing the trumpet parts, and we have the same note all the way through. And then the harmony is changed in the cornets, who are capable of playing those notes. Now we're going to jump back again to the second half of the 19th century, and another great orchestrator is Richard Wagner. The interesting thing about Wagner is he sort of changed the orientation of the trumpets from being paired with the horns to being paired with the trombone section. And he did that some with the bass trumpet, but he also did it, as you can hear in this example, from the introduction to the third act of Lohengrin. The first two trumpets have sort of an accompanimental role, where the third trumpet actually has the melody that's in unison with the trombones. So, in two. 1, 2, ready. All right, another, yeah, that was pretty good, guys. Another composer from that same period of time is Anton Bruckner. Bruckner was a huge admirer of Wagner, and in fact, in his Seventh Symphony, he starts the Adagio movement with Wagner tubas, because that was the movement he was writing when Wagner passed away. So that movement is sort of a testament to his adoration of Wagner. Anyway, with Bruckner, one of the things that we encounter is that if you look at any symphony trumpet part for any trumpet part in any of his symphonies, probably almost half of the notes, if not more, have some kind of accent on them. And if we were to play the accents exactly as they're marked in Bruckner, he would sound a lot more like Stravinsky than music of an organist, as Bruckner was. So anytime we see a marcato accent, we think of that as more of a regular accent. If we see a regular accent, we think of that as tenuto, etc. So all of his markings, we tend to back off a little bit to play the style accurately. This is a little cut from his Eighth Symphony. And so all of that whole passage where all three of them were playing is all accented, but you notice there wasn't a lot of punch to it. Now, in this part of the century, we have a lot of nationalistic composers, one of whom is Peter Tchaikovsky. Tchaikovsky also wrote for a pair of trumpets in his symphonies, all 6 of them, but now he's...
4 trumpet parts, Mr. Booth.
Pardon me?
When do we get to the 4 trumpet parts? Just curious.
What are you asking me?
When do all 4 of us play?
Right now, the next tune. Have a little patience. Geez, these young guys, they just have no patience. Tchaikovsky used a pair of trumpets in all of his 6 symphonies. However, he did write for trumpets and cornets in March Slav and some other things that he wrote. But he was writing for the chromatic instrument now. We're going to play a cut from his 5th Symphony. And actually, when we do this, there's a long melody line in the last movement that all conductors don't want to hear any breaks in it. They just want to hear this thing going on forever. So we stagger the breathing. Hopefully this will work out with our extensive preparation. So this is a melody line from the last movement of Tchaikovsky's 5th. Okay, another nationalistic composer. No, I don't need the mutes yet. Relax. I had a colleague one time early in this section's history, not this group, but and one of us had brought a brand new trumpet to work and left it on the seat, and somebody came back and sat on it. So that's why I was so quick to grab that out of the way. So Anton Dvorak is another composer that wrote for pairs of trumpets in his symphonies. And in his Eighth Symphony, there's an issue that we find in a lot of octave writing, and that is, this is a long melody line from the first movement of the Eighth Symphony. And generally, when we're having a melody line played in octaves like this is, we like the more of the sound to come from the second player. And that's not to disparage Ryan's sound, because he sounds perfectly wonderful today. You
deserve that.
But in general, if you get more of the sound coming from the lower octave, it makes the overall sound of the section a lot bigger. And it allows the first player to kind of take it easy on the top, because you're always going to hear that top voice. So here's that duet from the Dvorak 8. Okay, another great orchestrator is Rimsky-Korsakov. And in his Scheherazade, he actually is one of the first composers to use the trumpet purely for an effect. Here's just a little cut from the double tonguing stuff in the last movement. You want to quit while you're ahead? Okay. The next two excerpts involve mutes, which is why everybody's leaving their seats. And the first one is Debussy's Fête from his 3 nocturnes. And this is an example of using the mute to make the sound softer. In this particular spot, this is supposed to represent the approach of a town band. And so it starts off muted, and this whole section is repeated open. So in this case, you're using the drum corps lyric mutes. And over the years, even before these guys got here, we've been asked to use whisper mutes, straight mutes with foam donuts around them. It seems that it can never get soft enough for composers, for conductors. But one of the things with whisper mutes is we felt like we were just blowing our brains out just to be heard. So this is probably the closest thing to what we would prefer. So this is just simply to make the sound softer. And you'll notice there was a crescendo on the end of that, and that's because to simulate that approaching band. Now, Strauss in Don Quixote actually used the mutes to change the quality of the sound. This is a little trio that's marked forte, so obviously he's not trying to make it softer, but it gives it a much more incisive quality for this section. Now, even back as far as Beethoven, where we encounter the issue of having to play backstage. If you're familiar with the Leonore calls in Leonore 2 and Leonore number 3 overtures, you know that when you get, the further away you get from the stage, pitch starts to become an issue. So what we always advocate is if you have to play something like that backstage where you're a long ways away, and in Leonore, the first call is supposed to be further away than the second call. You always have to make sure that your intonation is adjusted ahead of time to match what's on the stage. Lots of composers have written for backstage, Respighi and Pines of Rome, and Mahler used it all the time. And this is a little, we just did Mahler's Second Symphony a couple weeks ago, and this is a little quartet from the backstage band. Just look down here and make sure.
It's not used to playing.
Thank you. And the last excerpt that we're going to play is from Petrushka. And Stravinsky's an interesting character because in his 1911 version of Petrushka, he wrote for a pair of trumpets and a pair of cornets. And then when he revised it in 1947, he wrote for 3 trumpets. This is from the 1911 edition. And you can hear, again, Russ and I have the trumpet parts, which are very static and don't move. And then the melody is and harmony is created by Ryan and Kevin. Just talk amongst yourselves. So we're going to close with, this is not an orchestral excerpt, but it is a gesture to, this is not an orchestral excerpt, but it is a gesture to acknowledge that a substantial part of our season is playing pops. And just about every major orchestra has to do that these days to remain financially viable. And we've played everything from Pink Floyd cover bands to bluegrass to Broadway, every conceivable pop style you can think of. Anyway, to close our performing part of the operation here, this is a little arrangement of Alexander's Ragtime Band.
Who did this, Tom?
Huh?
Who made this arrangement?
I don't know. We'll see how it goes.
So that's a brief, quick synopsis of sort of the orchestral repertoire from beginning to end in little segments. So I want to open up, if there's any questions, first of all, about kind of what Tom was just talking about, sort of our role within the orchestra, and then also anything that you had noticed before I start passing the mic around as far as the role within the individuals, because it is something that I think is not quite known until you actually sit in the section of what a second and third and occasionally fourth trumpet participates within the section. And so this is a really good time, because so often I know in school I didn't have that access. I was lucky enough though to be able to study with the section of the Cleveland Orchestra, so I was able to pick their brains and sort of how they viewed things and how they saw things. I know when there's auditions for second trumpet or any other section that comes up and a student comes and they want to play for me, I'm happy to listen to them. We'll do that, and then I immediately say, you've got to go talk to Kevin or Russell or Tom, because they know the ins and outs of exactly how to play those particular excerpts. All I can tell is if you're doing it correct or not is based on how you sound if we play it together, if you make it easy or not. And then usually after they come back, they play with me. I'm like, oh, I don't know what you're doing, but I'm having a good time. It's easy for me to play, so you must be doing it right. And it's a whole different set of style of playing and understanding. And so I want to be able to let you be able to approach the section here and be able to ask them some questions as well. So to start that off, is there anybody that would like to start before I kick it off? Yes, in the corner.
Why did you play the Tchaikovsky F?
You want to? The Tchaikovsky F? Was it? It's whatever was put in front of us out of the book. I don't think so. Well, what we have, it's in B flat. Oh.
You know the Barthold excerpt books?
Oh, yeah.
Don't use them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's exactly what these are out of and what we played. Yeah. Dun, 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 dun. Yeah. That's your answer.
What's the hardest thing for you guys as a section, like kind of blending with the orchestra and also blending with yourself?
Well, for me, the first thing is really the art of our section playing is how loud you can laugh before anybody in front of you hears it and starts to. There's a certain bit, if you want to say a punchline, of how loud you can say it before you get in trouble. That's kind of for me the thing that I had to learn the most. I will let you answer that question.
So the hardest thing as far as blending, that's the question?
Playing sharp enough to match me.
Okay. Well, I guess it sort of opens the door to talk a little bit about second trumpet playing. And the hardest thing from sitting where I am is obviously I try to prepare to be as flexible as possible. So, simplifying, volume, soft and loud, being able to blend with color is something I work on a lot also. So I want to always be prepared to blend and be able to adjust to anything that's going on in the situation. For example, extremes. When we do a pops concert, and we're doing extremely loud playing, or if Ryan has a smaller mouthpiece, we're doing something very bright. I have to match that. So, and then we're doing Schumann 2 or something very soft. Something very extreme. The difficulty for me is to be able to meet those extremes at any sort of given week, if that helps. So. And also playing with two different principals. Me and Russ have played together almost 20 years, but they play differently. So I not necessarily prepare, but when the other person is there, I play in a way that works for them, and it's always in a supporting fashion. So.
No, go for it. Okay.
I'll keep talking about that same issue of knowing what to match and the challenges therein. For my position, I have to play first or third, so I have to be, if I'm playing first, a lot of times my focus is outward, like listening around the orchestra to see who I'm going to match, note length, color, like Kevin was saying, types of articulation, who I have a line with, which you always have to do anyway. But when I, in my third trumpet role, I'm trying to totally match my section, because that's Ryan's doing that. Ryan is, you know, he's setting the tone for the trumpet section, so I just have to match him, you know. I can't go rogue and, you know, do what I think is right or wrong. You know, it's just like we have to operate as a unit. So sometimes it is a little difficult to decide, especially if you have several different opinions in the orchestra of how something's supposed to go. You gotta just kind of make a sort of instantaneous call about that.
I think one of the Tom, did you want to say anything? You talked a bit. I think what's what's interesting is each person talked about sort of what their role is. I know for me, then sitting here, it comes down to the difference of the vocabulary of the actual type of piece and the conductor. I mean, is this something where I feel like the brass is, even within the piece, is this where we're the dominant voice, and then I'll think of it that way as sort of trying to lead through, or is this a part where suddenly we're behind the woodwinds and we have to try to change? And to me, that's the hardest, and that's also the challenge of trying to figure out exactly what type of style and blend do I want to come from here, and then they try. Hopefully, I make a right choice, and if it's not a right choice, I always tell them it's, I'll take the heat from the conductor, because that's where I think comes from this chair. You have to make that right decision. And then it's the section's job for us to be able to produce that. But anytime, for me, the Mahler and the Strauss, Shostakovich, those are the easy ones. The hardest for me is Brahms, Beethoven, Schumann, those things where it's all about color within the infrastructure, mostly of the woodwinds, and really light. That is, and the balance, I mean, we're usually in octaves, so I mean it's either right or wrong. There's no really in between. And Bernie Adelstein, I studied with him for 1 year. When he retired, I'll never forget this. Someone had asked him, "What's the most difficult composer you ever had to play?" And I was excited to hear something with Mozart, Mahler, Stravinsky, or something. And he immediately said Mozart, and I just thought, that's ridiculous. I mean, I was 18 years old, and you play 3-4 notes. I mean, how hard could that be? And I thought, how is that? And then they said, who was the hardest conductor you ever had to play for? And he said, George Zell playing Mozart. And I just thought, I was wanting to hear Petrushka or something. And it wasn't until later realizing how difficult sometimes the simple parts are some of the most difficult as far as color and blend. And so for me, that's where I find it. I also I'll pass the mic. Going back and what sort of Kevin was saying, his job as far as with the principal, and when I'm working with students who are playing section parts, I think one of the first things that we talked about is the I don't care how good of a player you are, and if you win the principal job and you're playing that book, you are only going to be as good as the section allows you to be. And you have to realize that. It doesn't matter how good you are. You're only going to be as good as the person next to you, your second trumpet player, lets you be. I mean, you can sound absolutely great, but if you're not getting the support and the color from the section, then you're going to stand out. If they're not getting the intonation and everything locked in right, you sound wrong. I mean, there's so much stuff that is based on, if you really hear a great principal trumpet player, you also need to look at it and go, that section nailed it because he sounded good. So every time if I have to stand up, it's because of what they're doing. And so there's so much that we think that it's all about us, if we're going to learn these first parts. And I remember that being one of the first times. I think the first concert we did was Mahler 5 with Jaap when I was hired. And afterwards, it was just, it was so much fun. And I just realized, they had me stand up, and I was like, thanks, man. All right. I just got a raise. Thank you. It was all based on you're only as good as your section players, and you'll only be as and until you realize that as well, you're gonna have a hard time in your principal seat too. So that's a whole separate question. But anybody else? Yeah.
How often do you work on blending between let's say you have a piccolo part and then second trumpet, third trumpet have C trumpet part or E flat, C. What do you do to work on blending between different instruments?
The question was, what do we do to work on blending between the instruments if we're playing different from piccolo, all that? As a section, or are you talking about individuals? It as a yeah.
The way to answer that question, I think, is to look at it in our scenario, depending on what we're doing. For example, if we're doing a Stravinsky piece where there are several different instruments going on, maybe like, I don't know, one of the bigger pieces, or even like Rite of Spring, we'll adjust to what the conductor wants in that setting for that particular week. So it can change with, we can play the same piece different ways, but that goes back to what I was saying about always being prepared to have an extreme, be able to reach different colors and all that sort of stuff. So when we start a week like that, the first rehearsal is sort of this, and then by the second, we figure it out. But it's not ever a set thing. And that's kind of a good point. Even with different conductors coming in, it's like, we practice, the principal parts, pictures Mahler 5, and you're like, oh man, this is how I do it. I'm telling you, when you get in an orchestra, you'll never play it the way you want to play it again. It's like, we've had to do, to us, what feels like very strange things. But, like I said, to be ultimately flexible, and when a conductor asks you to do something funny, you just say, yeah, I can do that. And that's where you want to be. So, long story short here. Your turn.
Okay. I would just add that you were talking about matching, say, piccolo and big trumpets, things like that. Just kind of a observation about just trumpet players. Just don't let the trumpet play you. If you're playing a Schilke piccolo and you need to blend, you can blend on a Schilke piccolo. You just have to change the color. You just don't let it be that super bright sound that it wants to be all the time. So just constantly being aware of sort of where you're playing on the color spectrum, and if you're sticking out of the texture or not at all times, even if you're playing the same trumpets. Sometimes we'll play, I know some people are really hung up, never play B flats and C's together, but sometimes we'll do that. Sometimes Ryan will like to play the B flat trumpet, like say on a pop show, and some of us will be playing our C's, but we can still match. Yeah, it's just using our ears to do that.
Yeah, this week, Helmleben, we've got, I'm playing on B flat. We have B flat, C, B flat, C. So we have the B flat parts are B flat, C, C, and then the two E flats are two B flat parts. You didn't know I was playing B flat? Oh, killing myself for nothing. No, yeah. But I use B flat probably more than most principals do. But otherwise, it's mostly C. If your other question then was, if we know you have to play lots of different instruments within a short period of time, how do you prepare for that? And that's individual. As a section, I don't think we just do whatever we need to make sure we're ready for what we're having to do. This has been an unusual last 7 weeks. If you were to look at what we're doing, we started off, it was Bruckner 4, Bruckner 8, Tchaik 6, Mahler 2, and then Rachmaninoff 2, and then doing Helmleben. And then next week they have a Pops concert, all John Williams concert, and then Brandenburg. So those are exactly back to back. Those are the 7 weeks. And I'll let you know in a few weeks what we did and if it was successful or not. We're in the middle of it. But the idea is, for me, that is also where you have to learn in the comforts of the school. Everyone says it's going to be so much easier when you get out. I got news for you. It doesn't get easier. The stakes get higher, but it doesn't get easier. That's where probably November, December, I was having to look at and know what the schedule was. So that over December and into January, you're already going, because once you hit this part, you're not going to be able to do what you need to. I can't practice, certain things if I'm doing Mahler 2. I got to be prepared that week for Mahler 2. So that's just a matter of individuals. We don't, as much as we sort of hang out, I don't think we've ever had a practice session or talked about what we're doing. We just go to work and we make sure that we each are ready. Anything else? Yes. The question is, can we describe a typical week of services? We could try. Usually our main week is we have rehearsals with the orchestra Tuesday morning, and then we have 2 rehearsals Wednesday morning, Wednesday afternoon. rehearsal Thursday morning, then concert Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday afternoon. That's our typical classical week. That's our most of the week. So you work Tuesday through Sunday. And then sometimes there's an additional rehearsal on there. Yeah. So eight service week is standard. Sometimes we'll do 9. Sometimes we'll do 3 concerts. They'll add a rehearsal. Sometimes, like last week or next week, we're doing 2 different types of concerts. We have a run out to Greensville. We also then have a Pops show. And those aren't necessarily the typical, but the main thing is Tuesday through Sunday, Tuesday morning, 4 rehearsals, 4 concerts. And you basically just assume that's your week in, week out. Anything else? There must be. Yes. The question was, do we spend a lot of time together outside of work? Yeah, we won't break out the pictures. I'm sure you will. Is this AM or PM or middle of the night, middle of the day? The question is, we do, and do I think it's important? I think so, but I'm not sure we're the norm. Oh, this is embarrassing. Okay.
No, it's not going to be embarrassing. Huh? I'll be careful. All right. I have 3 primary responsibilities as 4th trumpet. One is to play fourth trumpet parts. Another is to play other parts so that these guys can have more time off. But my most important responsibility is counting measures rest for the principal trumpet. But this lighthearted antagonism that you see up here is really, there's nothing to that. And actually, I would hate to have this opportunity to go past without taking it, given that I'm retiring. We have more fun going to work and outside of work than any section anywhere, I think. And that's what makes it fun. The last time these guys came over to the house, they left at 5:15 in the morning. And that's one of the reasons I'm retiring, because I can't do that anymore. But we actually have gone on a series of redneck outings. We went to the roller derby together. We went to see Blazing Saddles together. And we went to the Devil's Bowl dirt track together. And this stuff is important because you spend, in any symphony orchestra, it's unusual to have a section that has the kind of rapport and fun that we do. Even looking at some of the string players, they have a stand partner that they haven't talked to in 20 years. It's pretty sad way to do business. And I am so grateful. I've been there for 40 years, and a lot of trumpet players have come and gone in the section. And for the last 14 years, it's been the best time of my career. So, thanks, guys.
I think when you're saying it's important that you go out, you can't force that. If you can't force someone to have a good time, we're going to go out afterwards and you're going to like it. That doesn't always happen. But what you can do, that I've noticed, because I've played in a lot of other groups and chamber groups, is that I've yet to ever find anybody that I couldn't find something that I couldn't respect and admire from that person. And I think as long as you always can do that with your colleagues, and you find that's your common denominator, and then next thing you know, you find a way that you can actually be able to work together and to be able to be together outside of work too. There's always something there, and I think that what's been so important for us is the fact that not only do we all respect each other as players, but we respect each other as people. I've made a lot of my decisions on how to play principal trumpet, not only based on things that I've seen from other people that I wanted to emulate, but if I can honestly say, things that I've seen from people that I decided I don't want to do that. And that's also very important. You know, that we're always talking about things, and this isn't bad. Even if you're going to a concert and you're listening to someone do a solo that you're working on, it's okay to say, you know what, I didn't care for that, because that's you know, that's what makes music so great, is our individual interpretation. Doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means that might not be how you want to play it. And same thing with work. You need to figure out what is you, what you're comfortable with. And so there were certain things I know for me that I always said, if I can get a principal trumpet job, this is what I wanted to do, or things I didn't want to do. And one of them, first of all, was with my teacher, David Zauder, being second trumpet in the Cleveland Orchestra, was to give respect to who's playing second trumpet, and let them know that, like I told you, I mean, you're only as good as that person will allow you to be. And the other one is whoever wins the third associate principal job too. You know, the whole idea is they're to play the first part when you're not there, but the only way anybody can be comfortable in doing that is to actually sit in that chair, and to be comfortable, and to know that they're given that respect and responsibility. And so I'm extremely fortunate to be able to have Russell. And I've told him many times that some of my favorite part of my job is being off stage, listening to him play my part. I mean, I think that's, I love it. It's great, and it's a good place to be. So I don't even look anymore. If it's a concerto, it doesn't matter if it's a great part or not. It's just, you know, that's it. There's certain areas that they will always play, and I want them to know that, you know. And I think everyone in the section, and this is also chamber music and a quintet, you're never going to be friends if you don't actually give somebody the respect of their responsibility and trust them. And that's one thing I think that we have in this section, that we all trust each other, that no matter what, it's going to happen. There's been a couple weeks where I've been out, Russell's been out, and then so Kevin bumps up and he plays first trumpet. There's been times when Tom's been sick. There's been times when I've been sick. We did a Heldenleben years ago. Kevin called me from the basement saying he's in the bathroom. Doesn't know if he can make it up the stairs, and he was a bit ill. And so we said, so we called someone, and, you know, had the bags ready backstage, and we just did whatever we could, and you just make it work. And it's kind of amazing. They say, how do you do it? Well, I don't know. I guess it's just because of years we respected and trusted each other. So whether you have to go out and have fun, we don't always stay at 5 o'clock in the morning. Linda was out of town. Sometimes it's only 2. Yeah, usually by 2 we're out of there. But it's yeah. Well, here's another weird thing. DFW is a large area. 3 of us all live in the same town, maybe just a mile or so from each other. 2 of us, our kids go to school together, and then you're not very far. You're just right up. Yeah. So we live very close too. Which is good and bad. But I think it is important. It's very important that you find a way to somehow respect who you're working with, and to trust them no matter what, because they won that job. And they've earned that job. They've earned that right, whether you agree with it or not. Even at school, if the faculty, someone has assigned someone to that part, whether you like to or not, they were assigned it, they earned it, there's a reason why they're there, and it's your job to figure out how to make it work and respect that. And that, to me, is the biggest thing. So I'm not trying to take over, but I think hopefully everybody here feels that, and that no matter what, we're ready to go. And then we're also ready to support each other too, in whatever way. You know, so I mean, I'm happy to drive at 5 a.m. or Kevin can drive at 5 a.m. You know, we're right down the road. So they didn't get that. Never mind. So any other questions? Get the mic away from me. I'll talk.
Well, you should be prepared to play whatever part. I mean, if you say, okay, I want to play second trumpet in a major orchestra, and that's your career goal, you can't count on that position being open. You can't count on winning that job. So you need to be flexible, as Kevin was talking about. You know, a lot of our job, when it gets stressful, is sight reading. And that's a reason that sight reading is on a lot of auditions. On some Pops concerts, we see the complete book of music at 1 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, and the concert's that night. And so we're seeing the music for the first time then. there was a time when Ryan's son fell and broke his arm on a Sunday morning, and the symphony. And the symphony was doing Shostakovich's First Symphony, which is a tricky piece. And so Ryan had to stay with his son, and the three of us moved up and played that part. So it's mostly about just being ready to do whatever and being flexible.
I think a lot of it is knowing the piece. I mean, I can't say now that I've won the first part that I'm always practicing all the second and thirds. At least from here, it's probably separate for the section players, especially Russell. I know for sure. Several times I've gone to look at my folder, and I know it's not there because he has to make sure if anything happens to me, he's got to play first immediately. Get the call on the way to work. So I know he's always knows two parts, and same thing. So I think for the section players, it's probably more important that you always know what's going on than it is necessarily for the first. My job is to know the piece, to know when is the lead voice in the third part or in the fourth part. When is it time when I need to sit back and the second part should be the most important. So in that sense, yes, you have to know all the parts, but do I sit around and then practice them, and do I know the transpositions of? No, but I know exactly when their role is the most important so that I can adjust and lead the section the right way. So in that sense, yes, you always need to know everybody's what they're doing. There was I remember one moment, one of the also, each one of us, I think we all have our special things that we can do. Russell can play Ravel Piano Concerto on a garden hose, and you can wake up and play it. And I can practice it forever and ever, and it's just not going to work. So one of the great things about doing concertos, and this is maybe how it started, I don't ever look, it's because Russell will play it. So that's the best thing about this now. I'll never play Ravel Piano Concerto again in my life. And so he plays it. And there was a couple years ago, and it's coming up again. And I remember thinking, it was a couple of weeks beforehand, thinking, oh, this is great. How he gets to play it. And I realized, wait a minute, now I'm the associate. I need to practice it because if something happens to him, I'm the principal. And I went through a panic and, having to learn that. And so it was the first time I realized, man, this is what you live like all the time. That's awful. Yeah. So there is things like that I had to be aware of. Oh, I guess I better be able to learn how to play it. So in that sense, you're always knowing everybody's stuff in the good sense, not where you're looking over their shoulder saying, oh yeah, are you sure? You don't ever do that. This is good. More? Yes? Any other? Yeah.
How many concerts do you guys prepare? Sorry, how many concerts do you guys have set aside, and how often do you guys rotate music? I guess does that make sense?
Oh yeah. How many concerts do we have in our rotation? I don't know the total amount of concerts we do a year, but I mean you got to add several a week. And as far as rotations are concerned, that usually goes with the principal's job, or that's at least here how we do it. And I try to keep it very even amongst everybody in the section as much as I can. So obviously there's a lot of times when Kevin and I, if we're doing classical concerts, if it's two trumpets, and so that we're on it, in our contract, I mean, if it's a classical thing, all the principals have to play, and of course all the pops we're always playing. So I will take off usually youth, and if I can, a couple of the youth things, family things like that. Otherwise, I'm pretty much playing everything. And then you try to figure out at the beginning of the year just how many weeks, and I try to even it up. I mean, if it's a 2-trumpet week, and I think Kevin's been playing a lot, then Tom plays second. If it's a 3-trumpet week and I've been off, and then so Russell's been playing my part, and then at the same time it's only 3, then Tom will play third part. So I think I think it evens out. No one said anything to me, but it's
It's a puzzle, though.
yeah, really it's so. But there's no real set amount. Every year it's different. We get the repertoire, and there's sometimes sorry guys, we're all hands on deck for 2 months straight, and there's other times we might do 6 weeks in a row and it's just 2 trumpet parts. We're doing a Beethoven cycle or something, and then then we just divvy it up. So it really kind of changes month to month or even season to season. But I try to that we all get the same amount of time off if we can, so that nobody's killing ourselves. Anything else? We're doing good. We just got a few more minutes, so we can wrap it up unless there's any other questions. Yes.
Like a lot of orchestral music has a bunch of rest, so how do you guys like really stay engaged during that and like
I'm not answering that one.
It's a good question, and I think it's a skill because when you get in the orchestra and you start playing all of these pieces, it is a constant that nobody sort of talks about. One thing we do is we have sort of body communication. Whenever there's a large rehearsal number coming up, we all make a visual. Because there are times when, it's like we got lives going on. Your kid breaks his arm riding the bike in the house or something, and you're just sort of sitting there in the hall, and you're just like, and you're like, oh, I have no idea where I am, that kind of thing. So we, collectively, we keep it together.
Go ahead and say it, Tom.
That kind
Go ahead and say it. Tell 'em about the look.
So there was one time that we were playing a piece, and I'm just used. I make it my business to count because I consider that my responsibility. And there was one piece we were playing where one of the movements I didn't play, and Ryan was playing, and he looked down at me like, "Where are we?" And even though I wasn't playing, I had the count. So that's how we stay engaged.
Yeah, the guys in this section, they know the look. I just have to look down. They know exactly that's me. Because it is. I do have that tendency of, oh look, there's a chicken. I just. And the worst part is there'll be like 10 measures rest, and I'll tell myself, okay, I'm counting this, and I start, and then all of a sudden I'm like, I realize I'm just out, and then there'll be, will be the tune that we don't, we're tacit on, and I'm 101, 2, 3, 4. I mean, I don't get it. I could count that. So there is, but a lot of times too, oh, it's right. A lot of times too, I'm also thinking about the next thing that's coming up or whatever. So that is, to me, that is a big challenge, and I'm lucky that for the most part. But we all kind of help each other.
Yeah, in all seriousness, the thing about that, it goes back to that's part of supporting each other. I mean, it's not a competition. It's like, everybody's going to get lost. Everybody's going to come in wrong. Everybody's going to crack a note. Well, it happens. But, it's like that's another way we support each other. You just got to be watching each other's back.
One little thing about counting rests too, the better you know the piece, you don't have to count so much because you can think in big sections and you're not expending so much mental energy, counting to 80 when okay, when the clarinet has a solo, then I have to wake up. I like to put things in my part like that. Those are my points where I sort of need to pay attention, and then I can relax and enjoy the music, listen to it without counting it, because I don't like counting music because you can't listen to it the same way. So just as much as you can free yourself up from having to count is helpful.
One time this week where I thought, okay, I'm not going to make it through this amount of rest, and I was feeling a bit tired, and I thought there's no way I can count, because I'm like I said, I'm really bad. It'll be 12, 2, 3, 4, 23, 2, 3. I'm adding 10, dropping 10 like crazy. And so I thought, okay, I'm really going to listen to this part. It's a beautiful piece of music. So I was really getting into it, and I thought, well, that'll get me through the whole thing. And as I was listening to it, I thought, oh, this is that great spot when the trumpets come in. And I hear Kevin come in. So, yeah, and so I was like, well, that didn't work either. So, yeah, so it's kind of that hard combination. You don't want to get completely into the music and forget what you're doing, but you don't want to get too far away. So, but we all kind of just we're helping each other out. Is there anything else? Okay. Yeah, that always happens, and that's where you hope that, not necessarily with our group, but I think we've all been in situations where that's certainly been an issue, and that's where you just have to realize and assume everyone's going to be a professional, and also not take things personally. To me, those are the two things, because if we work so hard to better ourselves, and the idea is when we're performing, we're allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, right? All this stuff we've been putting on, we put it out there for the audience. We're trying to make music. We're allowing ourselves to be vulnerable. So if somebody says something or reacts to us, we want to take it personal, and that's a hard thing to realize. It's not, and you just got to be professional and let that go. And if there's an issue, then that's got to be someone else's issue. But unfortunately, that's going to come up all the time, and that's it. You just got to look at it purely. For me, it's very black and white. It's just work at that point when it gets to there, and you can't lose sight of what the work is. That's to make great music. You rehearse, you do it, and then. Unfortunately, that does happen. But I don't know if anyone else has any other tricks. That's just what I have to do. So I know Tim Anderson, who's sitting in the back. Tim is our official, unofficial fifth trumpet player, and of the section. So if you have any questions really about us, he probably has very incriminating things to say. Do you have anything you would like to add as far as? This is a really great point, because we're talking about professionally playing in the section, and Tim plays with us quite often throughout the year, and sometimes it's the last minute even call if something happens, and so you definitely balance your life, your job as a freelance trumpet player, recently retired as far as teaching the band directs, and yet here you show up and you're one of us. You're a full-time trumpet player within this section. Do you have anything that we said or that we haven't said or shouldn't have said as far as what you see that's important within the work?
I do know where all the bodies are buried, so if you guys.
Yeah.
I've been fortunate to be able to play with you guys and the Dallas Symphony for a long time, and you guys make it incredibly easy to come down and play. It is an easy thing to come in and sub and be there with you guys. Even on short notice, I had sight read to Rite of Spring one concert because Bert cut his lip or something.
Yeah.
He couldn't play it. And it's just one of those things, you come in and everybody's ready to help you, and it works, and you guys are absolutely on point with all of that. You guys are great. And obviously not as just players, but you're wonderful people, and you're the kind of people everybody wants to work with, and it's been fantastic. So that's part of it. But the other part is being prepared. Like you were saying, you got to be able to come in and just play on short notice and be prepared yourself to come in and play anything.
Yeah.
And it's just preparation of being willing to sit in the practice room or get up and play.
Tim kind of holds that spot. I think a lot of us, we hope to be, in the sense that we use him to play fourth or fifth or sixth, some of the low stuff. We use him to do classical stuff. And then the pops, the John Williams. I mean, it's really, he does have a mean Colonel Bogey in the key of A. And so, I mean, and it's kind of nice, and that's something too that I know for me and for the section, we want to know who is that person that we can use and call all the time that can play anything from the classical to the pops to, you can have them there. They can play by themselves. They can play within this section, and that's ultimately what we're trying to do. And you want to be that person that's being called until you get that job yourself. And so, that's I would certainly everything. You want to know all the parts. You want to know the people in the section. You want to be able to be on their radar and be able to play all styles and everything there. And then that allows you, then whatever the opening is, and you get the section you want, you have a chance to be plugged in, and then you have the life you wanted. If that's it, and I think we're about out of time too, I want to thank everybody. First of all, congrats for being here, for being even invited, getting this far into NTC. If you're here as a solo or with ensemble, that says a lot right there. An additional congratulations for those of you who are continued on. I've been in your shoes as a contestant as well as a judge too, and this is a fantastic opportunity, And so congratulations to everybody in here and to Denny for continuing this after many years. It just keeps going and going, and it's always nice to see other friends and faculty and students. And so whatever you're doing is working, and that's the first thing to know. And so congrats on that. And I wish you had time to come down to Dallas to hear some Heldenleben the next couple days, but I guess you're busy enough doing stuff here. And so thank you for your time. If you have any additional questions or anything, we're pretty easy to find. And I'll hand the mic back to Denny. Thank you so much.
Hey, buddy. Good. Thank you so much.